So so many people, I think, when they talk about the principles, Rohini and and Angus, they talk about it as if it is a kind of, if it's as if it's a psychology that helps you navigate your psychological experience better as you go through this life in the world of form. Is that, do they think that's fair, kind of?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I encourage anybody to reread The Enlightened Gardener Revisited, or to reread even the last 40 pages that we're going to cover tomorrow. Because Sid, I saw so many times when we would ask him questions for the 40th time, and he'd just stop and he'd kind of get his bearings. He'd put his head down, like I gotta keep thinking these people are trying to hear me. That they don't just have wax in their ear. He'd say your ears are full of psychological wax, if we could just get them clear. So I think, and he makes the point in this, in these last pages, that this, haven't I told you that this is much bigger than psychology and psychiatry? That is the answer to all religions, all science, all everything. It's explaining, that whole idea that Sid, I love this quote where he talks about his experience, and you've probably heard me say it. I stood up. Suddenly it was like I was being sucked down a tunnel. There was a buzzing sound, and I was enveloped in a white light. It was then that I realized the true meaning of God, and I started to cry. Wow. That's bigger than your thoughts create your feelings. And I think it's and Sid said, there are an infinite number of doors of understanding these principles. It's a really big number, I think. That's as I've often said. So I think some people stop at, because it improves their life so much, they stop at, my life is so much better than it used to be. Until they're faced with, a teenage daughter that gets killed in a motor vehicle accident, or a spouse that dies within 3 months of cancer, or is killed in a motor, and things that, or becomes immobilized with a stroke, or unable to speak, or so I think we're talking about something bigger than just, loss of somebody dying. Like my wife, when you said you think you have a unique perspective, I thought, I wonder how many 25,000 people a day maybe in the world lose their spouse. I mean, it's not, loss, because this is impermanent. It's really not unique to experience loss, because there's an impermanence, right? I mean, and there's a line in the Enlightened Gardener Revisited that I probably was not till the third or fourth time that I read it, where he talked about that this is our second home. I don't think most people think of this as their second home. Now, I'm not saying we can wrap our intellect around that, but there's something about that is comforting, is and it's not about everything that I teach, there is not one thing that I teach because Sid Banks told me. There's not one thing that I teach that I haven't come to realize in my life. This is true. I love the idea of, and stop me at any time if I'm babbling.
Yeah, no,
There's no babbling
not at
going
all.
on.
Yeah, keep going.
I love the idea of thought experiments because even the scientists have done that when they couldn't, when the ability to prove things, like even Einstein's theory of relativity was not able to be really proved until World War I ended, and they were able to go and observe some, I don't know, an eclipse or something in physics. And this one famous psychiatrist, I think it was Niels Bohr, and I think Einstein, whoever it was, he said, he's a really nice guy, but if he really understood physics, he wouldn't have stayed up all night that night. He would have got to bed early like I did. Because he would have known what was going to be found. Which you could call it arrogance, but I would call it certainty. So many people I heard say to Sid, and Sid talks about it, I would listen to you if number one, you didn't say that it was so simple, and number two, that you weren't so certain. And Sid would get tickled, and he'd say, oh, so if I made it acted like it was more complex than it is, and acted like I wasn't really sure, then you would listen to me? like when you say that, it just sounds so silly, doesn't it? Doesn't sound so silly. There's a wonderful line in Second Chance. I think I even know. Do you remember when Mama Leela? I think I even know the page. When the Richard character, she says to him, "You appear that you're frightened of death." Do you remember that? Do you remember that quote at all? No?
I don't remember the full quote. I think I remember the part though.
Yeah. With a feeling of relief, I started to relate the same story I'd told Jonathan the first night we had met. There was a long silence while Mama Leela sat in contemplation, meaning, as he talks about, just in quiet, in quiet. And then she asked, "Do you fear death?" "Yes," I answered. "The thought of it gives me many sleepless nights." Now, here's what she said, and it's obviously the Sid character. And it's not that you have to believe that, because this is written in Second Chance on page 91, that it's true, but at least he's saying, just listen and let it resonate and see if your bullshit meter goes off or your truth meter. "Death is nothing to fear," she replied. "Beyond life lies beauty. Beyond life lies peace and tranquility. At death, this world now stops, and the full illumination of mind is born." I think if you read even Langton Gardner, he's talking about universal mind, divine mind, which a lot of people call God. Right? This shows you your innocence of life and allows you to see the true beauty of yourself. If that was true, I mean, in this world of form, we're going to miss the person, but it'd be hard to feel real sad about it for very long. Except sad for ourselves that we miss the enjoyment that we had with that person. And I think that's important to know. that grief, it's not grief for the other person, it's grief for ourselves.
Mm.
That whatever that person added to our life, we feel a loss of. And it's interesting, I have actually seen, especially with spouses, that put them to face with having more of a few doors of understanding of happiness is inside of me.
Mm.
And I realized, I thought 32.747% was this other, I'm making up that.
Yes, yeah, it's a very precise number.
But you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And so, or now I tell people, listen, and my children are all, 36 and older, but if even now, let alone when they were 10 or 12 and 14, if somebody comes in right now while we're talking and says, your daughter Maggie, your daughter Molly, your daughter Ann, your son Dan was just killed in a motor vehicle accident, I may be able to continue to be real. I probably would, because I would be honest that, okay, right now I know that the only thing I know to do is to go to quiet.
Mm.
That I trust that within me, within my consciousness, is everything I need to navigate my way through this.
Mm.
And if I don't know that, it's scary.
Mm.
But to the degree that I do know that, I don't live in fear of it happening.
Mm. Something landed for me in a different way with listening to what you had to say, because I've heard other people talk about death in a way where, we maybe have it all wrong. Evidently we do, for the most part, I think, to think that there's something very final about death. Some people have the sense that, that's the end, and that's what's scary. But what if indeed it is this event of expansion? Maybe it's a beginning, who knows? Maybe this is how suffering actually stops. We find this experience that's filled with light and peace and love, etc. And I think that the way that you articulated it is helpful for me to think that, what the person that's really suffering is the person that's left behind. And I can be like, oh, wow, how sad that you've died, but how lucky that you have died in a sense too. It made me think of it in those terms, that they are moving on, or they are expanding into something beautiful and unknown. And actually, I am the one that's suffering because I'm the one that's feeling grief, because I'm the one that's left behind. They're going home, and I'm still in the second home.
They're still in the second home, but they're going back home.
Yeah.
They're going not to the, and do people say, do you know? I don't know, but I in that I can't prove it,
Right.
but it certainly feels from every experience I've had in life as I've been open to it, that rings true, that we came from formlessness. And even when Sid gets pinned down at the end of Enlightened Gardener Revisited, and the person says, well, what is the true nature of the spiritual mind? This is on page 165 of 168, right? Andy searched my eyes with his, once again seeking a spark of comprehension, as he replied. There's a couple of times in here where the old gardener, he demanded something. He says,
Read these tales by Merce on Apple Music.
no, don't play me anything. Don't play anything. You just go do something else, Siri.
Yeah.
So I'd love this when he talks about, can tell you once you start talking about the world of formlessness, the laws of physics start to break down, and are no longer applicable. This is why I think we should talk about the form. And Peter says, how can you say with such assurance that the laws of physics break down when you talk about formlessness, especially when you say you know nothing about physics? I demanded. I'd never seen that before. Do you remember Peter saying, I demanded? The old gardener gazed intently into my eyes as though looking for the slightest glimmer of understanding. And I never saw this before. And for the first time, although I experienced it with Sid, for the first time, I could hear a tone of frustration beginning to creep into his voice as he said, haven't I told you again and again that the three principles of mind, consciousness, and thought cover all sciences, all psychological beliefs, all philosophies, all religions, and all human behavior. So then later, a page later, what is the true nature of spiritual mind, I ask? Andy searched my eyes, once again, seeking a spark of comprehension. I can see Sid taking a deep breath. I'm going to try this again, not giving up. There are many names you call it, the spiritual mind, divine mind, or if you prefer, universal mind is God. Again, I tell you, God is the energy of all things, whether in form or formless. This is why only God can be infinite. Little side story. My friend Dick Bezoyan was at British Aerospace Electronics when the 8 to 10 PhD physicists, do you remember that story?
Yeah.
That they came and within, I think after the noon break or after some break, Sid he quit talking about the principles and he started talking about physics. How, that because Einstein didn't understand infinity, his formulas were not correct. And do you remember what happened, Rohini?
I just remember or I think it was you showing the story where they couldn't understand how he was explaining physics to them and they were learning from him. Is that the story?
Well, what happened was, you can imagine, here's these 8 to 10 PhD physicists from MIT, and Dick Bezoyan, who was a psychologist, was the head of training there. He's a wonderful guy. Do you remember, did you ever meet him? Or
No, I've never met him.
He's a good friend. Do you remember Hans and Franz from Saturday Night Live?
Do you know that?
I didn't see it. No, that because I grew up in the UK, so we didn't have Saturday Night Live.
Okay. Well, George Pransky and he were into weightlifting, heavy. And so they were Hans and Franz. I forget which one was Hans. You should go on YouTube. Not should, but you'd enjoy and say YouTube Saturday Night Live Hans and Franz.
Okay.
And see George in this other and anyway. So he's there, and when they come back from break or from noon, and Sid starts talking physics and how Einstein's got the, God love him, but he was wrong because he didn't understand infinity. Understandably, Dick got really insecure. He says, I've got him on the tape of interview. And so he kind of stood up and he said, Sid, why don't you tell us more about the principles? But then he looked around and at least 4 of the PhD physicists stood up and said, Dick, would you please sit down? He's on to something. And at the end of the 3 days, he talks about this. They came to him, these physicists, and said, you pay him what you have to pay him. You're getting back here for 3 more days.
Wow.
Now I'm going to be in touch with, people that I still know that were there and see if any of those physicists are alive to see if I could get an interview like we're doing with them. Infinity is the energy of all things, whether in form or formlessness. All matter is created from a formless energy that has no body of its own, until it comes into this world of time, space, and matter. And he talks about that, yes, you're not separate from that which you seek. It's one thing to hear that intellectually, but if that starts to you start to have some realization, even brief instances that that's true, then how can you really grieve?
Mm.
There's nothing separate from the whole. Now we're in this world of form. We've been given the gift of personal consciousness to share in universal consciousness, to go through this thing we call life. We've been given personal use of the only mind there is, right? So why would we think that it's going to be taken away from us?
Mm.
I don't think God gives and then takes away.
Mm.
When we pass through the veil and go back home. I love the Hebrew, and I will answer your question. I love the Hebrew. I think it's like a lot of what do you call it? That maybe myths or mythology, but that there's a grain of truth in it. And I think they call this right here, this little place, the fulcrum. Is it the fulcrum? I should know that as a physician. It begins with an F and ends with an M. And do you know that? Have you heard the story of what this is?
No.
Well, your Orthodox Jewish friends will tell you that you're coming. They would say you're coming from the formless into form, and so just as you are born, the angel does this. So you forget. You forget what you know, and then you spend your life trying to recapture.
I love that.
From that God energy within you.
Yeah.
You spend your life trying to remember what you know already.
I love that.
It's beautiful.
It reminds me when I used to do a lot. I got into doing portraiture for a while, drawing.
Okay.
Yeah.
What did you call it?
Portraiture, but I would draw portraits.
Okay.
I think that at some point I realized there's something wrong with this portrait that I'm doing, I guess as a younger man. I couldn't quite figure out until I realized it was that one little thing above, between the lip and the nose.
You hadn't drawn it
I
in?
hadn't drawn it in, as if it wasn't there. How funny.
Oh, interesting.
But, yeah. So I'm now it's probably the first place I start. so I don't forget to include that.
I'm going to make a note here to send you the name of that. Send name.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
So if death is going back home, and I had 28 months to say goodbye to Susan. Linda, as you know, her husband was killed on Christmas Eve in an automobile accident. I had no chance to say goodbye. Now, and to had to suddenly tell a 14-year-old daughter, your dad just got killed, as he was driving up to join them at Christmas. Wow. I had time, the kids had time to be there, their mother, as she was making this transition. But I think you spoke of it earlier, Rohini. There's a lot of people that go through life fearing death. Now, it's inevitable. I said to the other day in some talk, I said, last I heard, like 83.79% of people die eventually. And I said that with a straight face, and people said, no, it's 100%. Oh, I said, geez, that really makes it worse. So it's going to happen, right? And could it be that everything just ends? I suppose. Maybe I'm seeing, but as a result, I'm gonna have a lot of fun until I die. Because I don't, that doesn't seem to make sense in what I've seen. I could be all wrong. It could be
You know.
nothing. And then that, well, what will I have lost? I won't have lost anything. Because this is all I've got right now is this life, right?
Yeah.
But I think when Sid said, another time I think in other times he says when he had this experience, and I'm sure you've heard me say it, but I think it's relevant to what we're talking about. He said, I saw what people call God was. I saw what life was. And I saw how the two were connected. Wow. It's a hell of a lot different than you're creating your experience. I mean, it's a hell of a lot more. It's not different. It's not, it's not an adversary to that.
Right.
But if it's a Venn diagram, it's a hell of a lot more than, right. And I can see why people, number one, even famous scientists like Sapolsky, who was originally raised, and he talks about as an Orthodox Jewish young man, and it just got to a point he didn't make sense to him. But he can't even, like, and I know Catholics the same way. I was raised Catholic. I know Muslims the same way. That the sad thing is, when they let go of that, they are almost afraid to look at the spiritual, because the spiritual and the dogma have been so wedded together that they haven't been able to see that they're talking about two different things. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, absolutely.
So to me, and maybe I've talked about it, but I think it's relevant to my experience of death, is that this understanding is not a religion. It doesn't have things that you have to believe. It offers a view of the world and a view of what's behind life, what God is, that God is indeed the energy of all things, whether in form or formless. But it has no dogma. It has no rituals. You have to do this and act that it's not prescriptive. People talk about it like I haven't been doing the principles. Well, that doesn't, it's a nonsensical statement. Because some people have moved it into. Now, it's different to say, if I really had a deeper understanding of the principles, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. That's different.
Yeah.
But the principles are not prescriptive. They're just trying to let you point to the system. Is that my, that's not mine. Must be Linda's, must have had a timer on the stove or something. I'm sorry, I got distracted by the alarm.
You're talking about how people talk about doing the principles.
Yeah, but they're just an attempt to explain the system of creation and life and how they're together, right? And so it's not a religion, but it is a theology. It has a theology.
What's the distinction? I'm curious. I haven't heard that before. What is theology?
Yeah. Now, if you look up the word theology, it will be a study of the attributes and the nature of what people call God.
Okay.
This is a theology.
Yeah, I've heard George refer to Sid as a theosopher, I think, from time to time.
Well, and that kind of, he didn't know when, and he did that. Sid has a chapter in The Missing Link on philosopher and theosopher, saying a philosopher learns from books and intellectual knowledge, whereas a theosopher as he would define it, is somebody who allows their personal mind to quiet so they have direct revelations or realizations
Wow.
from the divine mind,
Yeah.
that we are divine mind. We've been given a use of mind to use in a personal way, so we call that a personal mind, but it's not that there's two minds.
Mm.
And when we allow our personal mind to quiet down enough sufficiently, it is replaced by our essence, which is divine mind.
Mm.
Those times when we just know things, we know what to do, we know, and people say, how did you know that? You go, I just knew it. Now, people have hinted at that by things like that the answer was not going more into the intellect. People said, maybe I should sleep on this. Well, why would you do that unless you were
Right.
trying to allow your mind to quiet enough that divine mind could come
Yeah.
through you more freely?
Yeah.
Right. So this is saying, and the other thing this is saying, that which at least the major religions of Muslim, of Islam, of Christianity, and of Judaism, this all-loving, quote, God created this place where he's going to punish people for an eternity if they screw up. Bad enough. Wait a minute. To say that again, let me wrap my head around that. Yeah. Doesn't make any sense. I'm sorry, but to me, I'll own it, doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Well, but that's the prevailing, in a way. They're not everybody, but if there's a prevailing theology, it is of a judgmental and punishing God. Really not too far from Jupiter or Zeus when you think about it.
Right.
Really not evolution of that understanding. Oh, I mean, Hector didn't have a chance of winning because the gods were not on his side when he was battling with what was it, Achilles, right? Yeah, he didn't have a chance. I mean, he was, because it's somebody, there anyway. But that's been our view. And so when Sid talks about, like, I love it in this chapter, when he says that he talks about love and the three principles, and the character says, wait a minute, what? Flabbergasted, right? What does three principles have to do with love, right? And Sid very clearly said, what's at the source of life is pure love and understanding. Think about it. The purer your mind is, the more loving, caring, and understanding you will be as a person. It's hard to argue that, right? The purer your consciousness is, the more loving, caring, and understanding you will be. The purer your use of the power and principle of thought is, the more loving, caring, and understanding. Wow. But that's not what most people think is at the source of life. And I think it's at the source of most addictions, most mental illnesses, most suicides, and most homicides, is the belief in a violent, punishing, whatever you want to call it, God. So many people are living in fear. And you can't, speaking about neuroscience, the amygdala, you cannot experience hatred without experiencing fear.
I didn't know that.
Really?
Think about it. It's impossible.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Hatred is just, or anger even, is a response to fear. That somebody or something has the power to take something from you, or has taken something from you. that you've attached your happiness to.
Mm.
Mm.
I'm reminded of a country song, and we've come a long way in changing our views of men and women, and seeing that we're, we may do things, we certainly have different gifts, but that we're more alike than we are different, right? But there was a country song probably 30 years ago now, where this fellow broke up with this woman over the phone, and she ripped the phone off the wall. She took it and she threw it through the glass door window. And the chorus is, I guess you could say she took it like a man. Meaning, right? That's probably what most men
Right.
would do. It's just this time a woman is doing it. And instead of saying this is what you do at a certain level of consciousness.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I should stop jabbering and listen a little bit. And then I will go to my experience if you want me to.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, the one thing that I'm so intrigued by is the MIT scientists in the audience with Sid.
Right.
that I'm assuming, was it because of his conviction and his certainty that was making them realize, yeah, he's got a point here? Because I would imagine in that room, those kind of scientists would be like very hungry for empirical data to support such a bold statement. So, gosh, is there even a recording of that event? I mean, I would love to have. I'd love to know more about that experience, but it does seem to sort of suggest that, yeah, if Sid is being able to sort of show up with such conviction and certainty and still offering simplicity, that those are the kind of people that are going to demand a lot more than simplicity and personal conviction. But nevertheless, I think there is that sense that we all have, that we have a dividing rod between truth, what is true and what is not. So I imagine he's, that's what's being picked up in those experiences. I'm so curious about that.
If you could just hear yourself, Angus, because we are, even though you kind of give verbal honor to this truth meter, you're saying how, you're talking about intellectual conviction.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I love that you picked that up for sure.
And even in the book here, when they kind of challenge Andy, how can you prove that? Formless energy before form? And Andy says, of course not. I can't prove it, but I know it's true.
Yeah.
And see, everybody does. Everybody does before they engage the great illusionary intellect.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm sure you've heard me, but I think this is related. Is this okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I don't know if you remember the story of the young woman at West Virginia University when I was covering for one of the doctors on the psychiatric ward, and she had been up for 45 hours in a full-blown manic episode, her fifth admission in 7 months, psychotic this time, I think a number of the other times, 26 years old, had a degree in psychology, married, had a 6-year-old child. And she's talking 300 miles an hour and making no sense. I sat there for 3 or 4 minutes thinking, well, maybe if I just get quiet enough, I can understand and know where to. Do you remember this story, Rohini? A little bit. What do you remember about it?
Well, I remember how she thought you were crazier than she was, because you said that she had innate mental health.
Yeah, because I asked her, can you I said, nod or raise your hand or something if you can stop, because she was talking 250 miles an hour. Raise your hand if you can stop for just 40 seconds or whatever I asked for, that you can just at least do your best to hear me. And she raised her hand and she stopped. And I said, you are perfectly mentally healthy. You just don't know it. You've gotten caught up in a cycle of thinking that has caused epigenetic changes in your brain, dysregulated to where you can't even communicate in a way that can be understood. So 6 months later, when she's fast tracking in a registered nurse program, and she's doing well, and she was on 800 milligrams of quetiapine or Seroquel, 2,100 milligrams of lithium. Now she's totally off all the quetiapine as an antipsychotic mood stabilizer. She's on, I think, 300 of instead of 2,100 of lithium, and she's fast tracking through her nursing program. And we present, and her panic attacks have stopped and everything else, and she's having a really nice life. And she's working on the weekends as a certified nurse assistant to keep insurance for her 6-year-old. She's sleeping 8 hours a night. And the psychiatry resident asked that question, what did you think when Dr. Pettit said in the midst of your full-blown psychosis that you were perfectly mentally healthy? And her statement was, the first thought that came to me was, oh my God, they've given me a psychiatrist that's crazier than I am. Which is really funny, but it's kind of brilliant. Isn't it brilliant that in the midst of her psychosis, that shows how outlandish what we're trying to teach people is. That even in the midst of a full-blown psychosis, that lady, something goes, wow, her intellect, that's really crazy. That's crazier than I am. That is funny, but it also shows how revolutionary what we're pointing to. I don't know if you've seen, I should have the picture. I'm going to have it available more. I had a professor, he was a Benedictine monk, and I was, in the seminary for those 2 years, and it wasn't for the monastery, but it was for the diocese. But he would draw across the board as we came in for a philosophy class. He'd have a whole bunch of stick people with their heads standing on their heads. Have you ever seen me do that?
No.
So there's a whole 30 of them standing, and there's one person who's standing upright, who's standing upright. And he'd have that on the board, and then he'd go over and he'd say, somebody should talk to him. And he'd erase it. Well, that's us. That's us.
Yeah.
That's us. We're trying to say no. And so so what was I talking about right before that? Oh yeah. So then she said, but right after that thought, do you remember that? A thought came from another place. And I knew that what he had just said was absolutely true. I'm going to start doing, it just came to me, I'm going to start doing immersions where people can send people to me, and for 3 days, 7 days, 14 days, I know it's not me, but I know that in the presence of what I know and what comes through me, that the vast majority of people, I don't care what their label is, borderline personality disorder, schizophrenia. I've got enough experience over the last 35 years, and I don't know if you've listened to any of those stories of hope, that you give me 14 days with somebody, even 7 days, a lot of times, and even 3 days, it'll be impactful. But 14 days, the vast majority, they will be living in an entirely different world. And I want people to know that I don't care what the labels are. I hear even people in the principle say, well, what if they have borderline personality disorder? What if they're a sociopath? I was watching a show the other night, and they had this 11-year-old girl diagnosed as a sociopath.
Oh my goodness.
And the psychiatrist was all heart, but he really believed there was no hope for her. He could try to. But if we don't understand that we're all made of divine energy, and the only thing that is like on page 6 of the missing link, the only difference that appears to be is because of our spiritual and psychological understanding. Period. So when there's two things that I think about grief are important to me, or loss, any loss, is number one, accepting where I am without judgment.
Right.
If I'm in tremendous pain and unable to, it's not about, oh, I should know the principles. I've been around them for, it's not about that. That's just your intellect. That's the ego.
Yeah.
So number one is accepting where you are. And knowing that, I love that thing that we're the only of God's creatures that goes faster when it's lost. I've had an urge recently, facing some things, to go faster. And then I go, no, I don't think so, Bill. How many times does it take for you to know that it's in the stillness of quiet that you hear the next step?
Yeah.
How many 100 times does it take, Bill? Many 100 times. I tell people, Rohini, I learn slowly but forget quickly. So when Sue passed, and I had 28 months, she was in remission for a while, but the last 10 months, the first 12 days, I woke up, the closest I've ever had to a panic attack was in an MRI or something, one of those things that had been closed in, without any music, without any diversion. But anxiety, depression, yes, but anxiety was never prominent. But for 12 days, I would wake up almost having, trouble breathing. But I knew that it wasn't her death. It was my thinking about her death and facing life and having the children without her. I knew that. So I didn't go to this to try to, I was as kind as myself as I could be. I only took a week off work. I should have taken 2 weeks off in retrospect, but I went back after a week. I was able to do it, but it was only not until the 12th day that I just kept going, being in the now as much as I could be, going to stillness. And I woke up the 12th day, and you probably heard me say it. It's just true, but I'm reluctant to say it because people think, oh, I should be able to then after 12 days. Well, it's not. I woke up on the 12th day and I felt nothing, but I was filled with gratitude. How in the hell did I have 31 years with a woman like this? No way I deserved that. No way. And I just was filled with gratitude. Now, here's what I noticed. Do you remember my experience when I went to the hospital, when people started asking me how I was doing? Do either of you?
I don't remember. I don't remember the details.
Well, people, I would go to work, and after that day, I didn't do it perfectly from that moment on. But man, 85% of the way home. And I still stumbled and bubbled in the last 15%. But so people would see me, I think I was really respected in this community of 25,000 people in North, kind of the bullseye of South Dakota. And people would say, Bill, Dr. Pettit, how are you doing? And I said, I'm doing okay. I'm really doing fine. Thank you for asking. And as they would turn away, I saw almost anger on their face. And I was puzzled because these are people that I liked, and I know liked me and respected me. And so finally, the third or fourth time that happened, Angus, I can see you got your furrow there. But the fourth time it happened, it was somebody that, as she turned away, and I saw that what looked like anger, I said, Jane, I said, I'm really doing fine, and I said, Jane, can we step into, there was a little chaplain's room or something. Could we step into the chaplain's room for a moment and me ask you a question? She said, sure, Dr. Pettit. Well, I said, well, it looked to me, I kind of shared what I said. It looked to me like you are almost angry with me, and you're not the first one. You're the third or fourth or fifth one. And I'm just puzzled. Am I saying something in a way that, that I don't mean to be saying something that makes, right? And she just started sobbing. And I forget the details, whether it was her mother or her father or her brother or a sister that she had lost 8 years ago, and she can't even think about him without this rush of sadness and grief. And on one hand, she said, the first thought was, I want what he's got, but I don't know how to get there. And that's pissing me off. She said, I mean, she really kind of said that. And I said, now I understand that a lot of people are walking around. Not only are they carrying around anger and resentment from things that have happened in the past, a lot of people are, and guilt from things that they've done, mistakes that they made, instead of seeing their own and others' psychological innocence. That's one thing. Psychological innocence covers anger and resentment and guilt. It doesn't cover grief. You have to have a deeper understanding of what God is and what life is and how it works. And I realized that there's a lot of people walking around carrying a burden of grief. It's interesting. I was when Sid in Enlightened Gardener Revisited, this is one of the things I'd never seen before. He talks about psychological viruses. And when he talks about psychological viruses, there's anger, greed, envy, loss was in there. That would offend some people.
Right.
That's a psychological virus, being caught up and burdened by loss. Now, when you think of it logically, he says, why do you call these psychological viruses? Do you remember what his answer would be? Because they rob us of our sanity and our peace of mind and our joy. And even more so, they rob us of being in the only thing that exists, in the now. Now, those first 12 days, I accepted where I was, but I knew that I knew where to go with silence, but I knew that I had 3 children, 3 daughters and a son, who were grieving. The longer that I was in that state, the less present I was to be there in a loving understanding and listening to these children who lost their mother. I'm less able to be the love and understanding that's at the core of our being. If we can look to have that without the burden, as Elsie said, not be frightened by our experience, and be able to accept our experience without the burden, of guilt or judgment. Is that?
Yeah, that's profound.
Anyway,
That's really beautiful.
I hope this has been helpful.
Yeah, thank you so much.
It's been amazing. Gosh, thank you. It's been so rich. Thank you, Bill.
Oh, you're so welcome. You're so welcome.
Yeah.
You
I really appreciate you sharing your experience and revisiting those quotes from the books and being able to just hear them at this time and in the way that we're able to hear them now. It's wonderful.
Yeah. If it's just to know that it's just a continuous journey. That's this is not like learning how to swim,
right,
or riding a bike where you just know.
Yeah.
It's and then you come upon something that challenges your level in understanding. I watched that new version of Pinocchio, but just the old version of Pinocchio was the Pinocchio wanted to be free from the strings. It's not a bad metaphor for understanding the principles. The first time we get a real glimpse, we cut a lot of strings. Things that used to have the power to jerk us around. But there's nobody's walking around with no strings.
Right.
I love that.
Yeah.
And so you can either, when we feel suffering, when we begin suffering, if we know that the only person that can possibly create real suffering for us is in the same underbridges we're in, then we don't look out there. We just go, okay, so I'm being given an opportunity to see a few more doors of understanding. I'm being given an opportunity to continue this journey that, no, this is my second home. It's not my real home.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Our programming and conditioning comes with a lot of strings attached, I guess.
And it's our job is to now they're illusionary.
Yeah.
Right.
You know,
They're not
like
realistic.
it says in the where he talks about, you know, when I let go of anger, it gets you out of jail, but you realize, like the elephant that has the little thing,
Yeah.
you never really were in jail. No, but there
Right.
was no lock on the door.
Yeah.
All you had to do was walk out.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
that takes a realization.
it does.
Yeah.
A deepening of understanding.
But it's a lot easier than thinking you're going to have to find somehow to break down the prison doors.
Yeah. Yeah.
A whole different
Easier,
ball.
but also maybe more elusive too, depending on how that unfolds.
It's elusive. Like Sid says, it's elusive. He said, when you don't know the answer to something, it looks complicated.
Mhm.
As soon as you see the answer,
Yeah,
it's simple.
it's obvious.
Right.
And then you come upon something else that looks complicated. You go to quiet, you have the insight, and it's
Yeah.
so
No.
you get less of, you get more a realization that when things look complicated, it is the intellect, as Sid says. And when they look simple, it's the spirit. So you
Yeah.
know which way to look when it looks complicated. It's rare that, you know, I look with my intellect for maybe 2 minutes, but because if you've got enough of the formula and enough of the variables, you can find the answer. If I don't find it in 2 minutes, I'm probably not going to find it in
Right.
32 years. But if that's the only place I know to look,
Yeah.
as I did for 41 years, I didn't know there was another place to look.
Yeah.
It helps you have compassion for people that are struggling. Even though it's hard to see these people killing bunches of people and then themselves, and you go, how much pain would they have to be in to have that make sense? But then you've got all these people that are dealing with losses of loved ones.
Yeah.
And having to come face to face with, is this my primary home or my secondary home?
Yeah.
We are those people. We are that one guy, one person with standing up and all the other person on their head. Somebody needs to talk to him. Somebody needs to talk to you too, because you obviously think the same thing. Those other people.
Well, thank you
Anyway.
so much, Bill. I really appreciate you
Yeah.
giving us your time, and it's great seeing you again. It's been a while, like you
Okay.
said.
Yeah. It's been
Okay.
so lovely. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Well, I hope in the future that we have a chance to connect in some
I
way.
so hope so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Let me just stop
Okay.
the recording here.